good morning, everybody. Today is the 1st of April, 2026, and this is Senate Natural Resources and Energy. And today we're going to be talking about a Bill H 727, an act relating to sustainable data center development. And we have first on the testimony list is Representative Laura Sevilla from Wyndham 2.
Morning.
Good morning.
So this bill has come from our interest over the summer, talking with ISO and others that have to do with that are working in other regional transmission areas, understanding the impact that data centers are having on the electric grid and on the market for electricity, the reliability in particular in the PJM territory, which is to the south of us, for those of you who don't know, and in the Atlantic areas stretching up into the Midwest. There's been a lot of impact there in terms of reliability and on costs, as well as the potential for environmental impacts. Given that New England has a constrained system, we already have fairly high electric rates in New England because of that. It is not, New England is not a super attractive place for data centers, which need a lot of electricity. But because of the outsized impact that they have had in other areas, it seemed wise for us to consider how our existing laws would greet such a development. We know that they have some minimal economic development benefits. So there are some property tax benefits for the town and the education fund. Very small amount of jobs. The big investment that they bring, if it makes sense for them, is in infrastructure, either in transmission infrastructure or potentially in upgrades to public water systems. They use a lot of water for cooling if it's not a closed loop cooling system, and even so. Our approach in the committee was, as I said, to consider working with actually 3 of our attorneys how a data center would encounter land use, water use, and our electricity. So that is the bill that you will hear. We looked for gaps and attempted to ensure that we had thought about if those gaps should exist, and if so, how we should manage those. One thing that I would encourage the committee to consider exploring is bring your own power to these, and in particular, bring your own renewable and or clean power to these. So even if there's no doubt that they will be able to hook into the grid and get the power that they need. But what we are seeing nationally is with the suppression for renewables and the incentivizing of fossil fuels and the dramatic increase in load that data centers, other high load users are bringing, we are seeing a big increase restarting coal factories and others. So if we are able to have renewable and or renewable and clean, bring your own with I would just encourage. That was a discussion that was happening between the administration and environmental organizations, and we just did not have time to finish and sort through that. So we've got our 2 attorneys here who will do a much better job talking about the details. I don't know if there's any questions.
How would a facility bring their own power?
On campus or through their own contracts.
Protect natural assets we need to.
Sure. Yeah. If we're looking to expand natural gas, I think a lot of centers are doing.
And there was a bill on this side. But I think I signed on to having reporting. Did you talk about that possibility?
We did not, we took a different approach of, and one of the things that we were cognizant of is an executive order that has been issued by the president around limiting the proliferation of AI, but also noting that states have the right to citing laws, et cetera. And so that's the approach that we took. It seemed to say this, a moratorium may please.
Well, the moratorium is really for the purpose of doing what you've done.
Exactly, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
in part, yeah, so yeah. So,
Any discussion, consideration of where they decided that they have to do like a nuclear power plant, have to be next to a water supply or for food, are they that big, they create that much heat?
They use a lot of water. And so they're in many places in the country, they're hooked up to the public water systems. We've contemplated, any different number of ways that they could access water, but yes, they need cooling.
the newer ones are closed loop though, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of them are close. And we did take testimony from Green Mountain Power, who had identified that they had tested their system for places where, if they were asked where this might be appropriate. And there were several, including the former site, which is privately owned in Vernon.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Next up, Maria Roy. Morning.
I'm doing very well, thank you. Nice to be here, very well with City Council. So, Representative Sigley did a great job providing the context. I was just gonna provide a little bit, more detail about the overall context, and then we can go through the bill, in as much detail as you would like. So, just to start with, what is an AI data center? Basically a large warehouse that contains all of the IT hardware for data processing, storage, and distribution. So imagine floor to ceiling racks containing servers, which are computers, filled with lots of compute components, including high performance data processing microchips, like GPUs and GPUs. And the reason why I mention that is because together, they create a massive amount of computational power, which is necessary for large scale AI training and inference. So that's why AI data centers have all this IT hardware to make that possible. The simultaneous calculations, parallel processing of data. And I also mention that because these microchips, when they're operating, generate a lot of heat, as Representative Sigley said. So in terms of the requirements, other than the IT hardware, the power to operate everything, water, depending on what type of system, as Lori mentioned, you use, cool these microchips that generate a lot of heat. And then in terms of broadband, fiber optic, get the information to and from. So those are kind of the utilities that are often reviewed and are looked at in this bill, with the exception of fiber. And then physically land, typically for a data center that has the capacity to use 20 megawatts of power. The land requirement would be between, there's a range between 10 and 40 acres. The building itself would be about 100,000 square feet, which is roughly the size of 2 football fields, including end zones.
Thank you for the context.
Okay, I know, it's not great with the numbers, scanning time, you know why I do that in particular, because I was in the committee and there's so many numbers here, and I said, well, the warehouse is 10,000 square feet, and somebody's like, that's the size of my bookstore, and I was just like, that doesn't sound right, and then I'm like, wait a minute, there's no. So I try to like, even if I get the numbers wrong, you have a visual to know. In any event, and just to give a little more context, 20, and I'm referring to 20 megawatts of power because that's the minimum threshold that would trigger the requirements of this bill. So if you have a data center that has capacity to use 20 megawatts of power, then you have to comply with the requirements of this bill. So a couple of things to give a little more context in terms of the very largest of data centers, kind of the hyperscale. 50 megawatts is kind of considered the minimum, and these are just industry standards, there aren't really specific legal definitions. 50 megawatts is kind of the minimum. For the large kind of wholesale co-location facilities, 20 megawatts is considered the minimum. So in looking at what other states have done and how they've approached the issue and talking with the sponsor, 20 megawatts is kind of the minimum threshold that other states have looked at, some are more. But I just wanted to provide that context. And in terms of what that means in terms of power, so using 20 megawatts of power is roughly equivalent to serving 20,000 households. And the water, if you used an open loop evaporative cooling system, you would be using about 500,000 gallons a day. But as is mentioned, the type of system you use makes a big difference. The closed loop, almost no water consumption, but it does require more power. So there are trade-offs and how you triple the water again to power to cool it. Or to use the HVAC system, the cooling system, yes, you have heat pumps or whatever kind of infrastructure to keep it. So less water, more power, so on. So
Is there anything in the bill that deals with water usage?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, there's a whole section, and I am actually gonna let Michael Brady talk about that because he is the water expert, so when we get there. So I think that's all I wanted to say, just as an overview. Representative Sebelia mentioned in terms of possible benefits, tax revenue, upgraded infrastructure, and concerns being the use of the power, potential use of water, other environmental effects, and equity, social justice equity, where they're cited, and so on. I did provide, and I believe what's on your website are some resources that might be helpful. One is a 2024 US Data Center Energy Usage Report, which is kind of like the most well-known report that really drew attention to how much data centers use in terms of energy consumption. Since then, Berkeley Lab, which is the lab that issued the report, what I also provided a link to has been updating the latest research and documentation. So if you want to look and get more specific data, those resources are there. And also what was really interesting is I provided a link to the Accelerating Speed to Power Data Viewer, which another national institute published. And this is an interactive map. So you can actually go in by location. It's a tool that was meant to help states, utilities, data centers decide where there is the infrastructure, where there is the capacity, where there might be need for upgrades. But you can look at a specific area and you can see where there are planned data centers. You can see what the transmission lines are, what the price is for a region. So it's really, it's a great tool, I think. And in part it was put together because there is a federal program for rebranding an existing federal program for upgrading the grid to utilities and states. Anyway, it's an interesting resource if you want to take a look at it, so. All of that being said, so we'll walk through the bill, and so page 7, yeah.
Yes,
So I'm thinking downstream, any consideration for deactivation plan for these sites? Is there any like radiation hazard? What are the things, I'm thinking that eventually technology will help to make the footprint smaller maybe and give us more efficient use from that site. Is that all considered?
It's a great question, and the committee definitely considered decommissioning. And whether existing law had protections already, either through Act 250 or through the PUC, if there are energy facilities on site. Ultimately, they concluded there might not be enough, and so you'll see the very last section asks the Department of Public Service to work with other interested stakeholders in state government, the Land Use Review Board, Secretary of Natural Resources, to propose a model for decommissioning, so that every entity would have to have a decommissioning plan, and there are all kinds of requirements that they need to use for hazardous materials, even the just the data alone, making sure that it's not out there, that there's, it's sufficiently sanitized, I think is the word, but so, yeah. So that is an important issue and one that they.
One last question.
Yes.
The utility companies weighed in on additional solar sites saying that, really like you guys consider just putting them where our infrastructure will support it. Is this, have the utilities weighed in on PUC or?
In terms of the location, or just in general,
Requirement for providing power if they don't do
on site.
Right.
I don't know if I don't know.
I do
Yeah.
plan on having the distribution utilities.
Yeah.
in.
Because I honestly just don't remember, they did testify that on that specific issue, I don't remember, so H 727 passed third reading yesterday in the House. There's not an official as passed by the House copy yet, so that's why what's posted is the version, the strike all amendment that was voted out of House Energy and Digital Infrastructure. There were no floor amendments, Ways and Means took possession of the bill, they did not make an amendment, so this is the language, which you'll see in the as passed. So that being said, we'll just start going through section 1. So this section pertains to kind of the energy usage and the PUC oversight of those tariffs for electricity. So it creates a new subchapter, chapter 5 of Title 30. The short title is the subchapter shall be known and be cited as the Vermont Sustainable Data Centers Act. And I'll just read the purpose. I think it helps to establish the goals further. So line 12, the purpose of the subchapter is to establish a regulatory framework that ensures responsible growth of an emerging industry in a manner that protects existing electric ratepayers from unwarranted costs and promotes sustainable climate, environmental, community, and equity outcomes consistent with state policies. So the definitions, again, just wanted to draw your attention to the on line 20, the 20 megawatts, a facility that uses or is able to use 20 megawatts or more of power and is engaged in providing data processing, hosting, and related services as described in, and then you'll see a 6-digit code that's as part of a classification system that's put together by, it's called the North American Industry Classification System, and the Federal Office of Management and Budget puts together this document that basically categorizes all businesses, etc. So the economy by type. So it's a way of keeping track of market trends and also for regulatory or tax purposes, you can identify.
What is this called? The North American.
Yeah.
Industry.
Yeah, North American Industry Classification System. So it's actually cited in the definition.
You often see it listed if you're in a IC code. That's okay. Referring to.
Yeah.
Got it.
I think there are like 6 primary different subjects.
Right. All kinds of subs.
Yes, and then lots of the 20 subsects combined. And then facility is just all of the buildings and equipment structures, et cetera, on the site or contiguous or an adjacent site. So the first substantive section, section 284 on line 7. So this has to do, it's called a large load service equity contract. This is the contract that's entered into between the data center and the distribution utility. What you'll see in here is that there are specific provisions that need to be included in every contract. And ultimately, the contract needs to be approved by Public Utility Commission. So, for the purpose of ensuring.
Not just, sorry, would that have to happen anyway? Just sort of know that.
For a large load,
Yeah.
typically, I think most large load, most utilities have tariffs for their large load customers, so they have to have tariffs approved. Yeah, so this is meant to just provide standard contract provisions that they all have to have, but yes, I think in general, they would have to have a tariff. And the tariff basically describes the rates, the terms of service for the ratepayer. And so I believe most of the industrial users, ratepayers are subject to tariffs, whether they're individual tariffs or more. So for the purpose of ensuring just and reasonable rates for all ratepayer classes and mitigating the risks of financial exposure to electric distribution companies and their existing ratepayers, the data center shall be served by an electric company pursuant to a large load service equity contract approved by the PUC. So in that contract, it specifies that it shall include one, a method for allocating costs that is equal or proportional to the costs of providing electric service to the data center, including providing for equitable contributions to the embedded costs, the existing costs, and the efficiency, reliability, and resiliency of the electricity network. And then that's further elaborated on subdivision 2. The contract shall mitigate the risks of other ratepayer classes paying unwarranted costs, including any electric generation, distribution, and transmission infrastructure costs incurred to meet the load requirements of the data center, or the energy capacity, transmission, or resource adequacy costs incurred as a result of the data center's load. So any upgrades to infrastructure that are required, and then also the ongoing operational costs, making sure that the grid has adequate supply and meet the demand.
Can I ask you a question on that? So normally there's if you have to upgrade transmission lines, there is a cost split within ISO New England. So does this, would this supersede that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Now, this is really looking in state.
okay,
So if the distribution utility is incurring costs, there would still be that, the regional model, there, other states are benefiting and, I don't know exactly what the model is. But
Yeah.
it's somewhat based on how much your state is benefiting from, the
Okay.
increased capacity. But
okay,
then in terms of whatever Vermont's portion is, how it's allocated through existing ratepayers in Vermont.
yes, I guess I'm thinking about, if a data center comes and as a result, we have to upgrade transmission line. And we're saying you need to pay for that upgrade. Then that covers it, and it doesn't go to the ISO New England split.
Yeah, I think that's a good question.
Okay,
Let me give it a little more thought, but
Okay.
I think if arguably the data center said, okay, we're paying for this infrastructure, but there's excess capacity and other states might benefit, so we think
Okay.
it might be like that, but let me.
yeah, I could just picture that it might be useful to
Yep,
make this harmonize with whatever.
Yeah. yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So then page 3, subdivision 3 on line 3. Specify the duration of the contract and the date or the estimated date that the electric company will begin to provide electric service to the data center. 4, obligate the data center to pay a minimum amount or percentage based on the data center's projected electricity usage for the duration of the contract to ensure compliance with subdivision 1, and that's the cost allocation to ensure other ratepayers aren't being burdened by any additional costs. 5, include a reasonable charge for demand in excess of the data center's projected electricity demand at the time the contract is entered into, so if they use more than they anticipate using. Include a collateral requirement sufficient to mitigate the risk of stranded costs. So if the company ceases to do business for whatever reason, that there is again financial protection. So that the utility and ratepayers aren't left paying for those costs. 7, include provisions requiring implementation of demand side management operational measures for the purpose of maintaining grid stability and efficiency, including demand response and flexible load management practices, such as load shifting, peak shaving, and the use of distributed energy resources. So these are just all, demand response tends to be is if there's an emergency that you're able to switch to backup generators, in order to ensure that there are no blackouts on the grid. The flexible load management tends to be more long-term planning, where you're, it's hard to say. I think most of the power draw for data centers is continuous 24/7, but to the extent they can shift to either on-site generation if they have those facilities, or to battery storage, or backup generators to relieve pressures on the grid, that they're able to do so. So just having provisions to address those contingencies. Then 8, include provisions for the collection of gross receipts, taxes, energy efficiency charges, and any other fees or charges that may be applicable to electricity revenues. So these are not new taxes, the gross receipts tax, this is just the regulatory fee, it's actually more of a fee, it goes towards funding the PUC and Department of Public Service, so the utility will take out a percentage of the revenue it collects from the data center to pay their fee. And you have the energy efficiency charge, there's another provision that specifically says that they have to pay the energy efficiency charge. There are other programs that allow some businesses to kind of do their self-managed efficiency and not pay the fee. You'll see that there's a section here that specifically says that the data center can't do that, they have to pay the fee, the energy efficiency charge. And that's just the other fees or taxes that may apply, actually sales taxes or whatever. And then 9 on page 4, meet any other terms or conditions required of the commission that are consistent with the purpose of the section and in public interest. So subsection C is a kind of an overall finding. The commission shall not approve a large load service equity contract unless the commission first finds that the same will promote the general good of the state. So just a general finding. But subsection D then goes on to say, before approving a contract, the commission shall find that the terms of the contract, and these are specific findings that the PUC needs to make. So line 9, subdivision 1, will not adversely affect the efficiency, reliability, and resilience of the electric power system grid. It will result in an economic benefit to the state and its residents. The terms are consistent with the principles for resource selection expressed in the applicable electric distribution company's approved least cost integrated plan. These are plans that every utility has to prepare and they're updated every 3 years.
What does that actually mean?
What's that?
What does that mean? Notice.
The least cost integrated plan. Yep, so these are, every utility has to submit every 3 years, this what's called a least cost integrated plan by statute, and basically looks ahead and try to balance supply with the supply that's available and with the demand. Anticipate what some of the needs are, And as it's contemplating any growth, to try to do it in a way that imposes the least cost on ratepayers, so it does it in an economical way. So, and also to meet the environmental goals of the state, so trying to look, each utility has to kind of balance.
Is this also known as the demand resource plan? Okay.
They file that with the PUC.
Yeah,
Um,
I was find out,
that was okay.
yeah, I don't know.
I have one other question too. As we're going through this, this is these are conditions for a contract that would be between the data center and the public utility, well, it has to be approved by the Public Utility Commission, but it's a contract between the data center and the distribution utility.
Yes.
And so presumably if it's a contract, then the distribution utility would also have to approve this as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure they are.
Yeah, and presumably they're not gonna enter into a contract, that's not for, they're right, but it's just a way of making sure everybody's on the same page and thinking through. Which is also related to the next, are consistent with the electrical energy plan approved by the department. Unless there's a good cause to permit a variance, so this is what the department does, looking at the electrical industry, same kind of balancing of supply and demand, what the state's renewable goals are, trying to transition towards meeting the state's goals for renewable energy, and doing so in a manner that does not impose unnecessary costs into factor in.
But this contract, if a data center does provide its own power, this contract would exist. Because it's between the electric company and the data center.
So if it wanted to be entirely like self-managed utility.
Yeah.
Something that Global Boundaries has done. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just that conversation that we had about bring your own power. Kind of thing. Yeah.
Right, so they would need to, like Global Boundaries did, file a petition with PUC. And what Global Boundaries did is they set up basically their own utility, fully owned public service company.
Yeah,
That functions like and is subject to all of the laws in Vermont,
right,
govern utilities.
but there's not a special thing in here about what
There is
added requirements or anything.
there are no added requirements, so if they were like a perfect little energy island, maybe they could do that. I think part of the concern, as I understand it from the data center's perspective, is having the ability to access the power grid is an important backstop often. So it doesn't mean that they can't be their own utility and buy wholesale and have power purchase contracts. But whether they can actually be their own with their own on-site generation facilities.
Okay, I guess my point is that if they're generating this wouldn't apply, so. We would want to make sure that there are sort of equivalent requirements to any. Entity that's doing their own.
That'd be a good shift.
Yeah,
Wouldn't
yes, go ahead.
they, even if they were, wouldn't they still do this because they want to be connected to the grid? If they're gonna be connected to the grid,
I
this
think-
applies, right?
I'm sorry,
If they're going to be connected to the grid,
yeah,
this would apply.
this would apply, well, so in that, okay, so I think I'm gonna have to go back and look at something that I just said, sorry. In your situation, they would be establishing their own utility that would function like a utility, so that contract, and I know it sounds weird, but the contract would be between their. Utility that they set up and the data center, so I think it would apply.
They would, okay,
Oh, because they're establishing their own utility.
Yeah, yeah,
Internally.
I see,
so that would be like their own distribution utility.
Okay,
It's a great question, and I think that's how it'll be written.
Okay.
But to clarify that, if there's any,
but if they didn't want to go the global boundaries route,
but if they didn't want to, that would.
this would still apply.
Correct.
okay.
Okay.
Um,
And not to be, let's be enforced.
No, it's good. Yeah.
Even if they did do their own, and they were connected to the grid, this would apply for that reason. Is that correct? Because they're gonna want.
They're trying.
Yeah, yeah.
Through Island, it's not like.
Right, right. So then you would have, it would be a distribution utility then, would have to connect to the grid, and so all of the, right, yes, yeah. Just like any other, yeah, no, I appreciate the question, because,
So abstract.
yeah. So then, 5 will ensure that the data center will be served economically by existing or planned transmission facilities without undue adverse effect on Vermont utilities or other retail regulated classes. And are consistent with environmental justice and equity policy as established in the Vermont law. So then, as I mentioned previously, subsection E, a data center shall not be eligible to participate in an energy savings account or customer credit program under Vermont law or self-managed energy efficiency program under Vermont law. So again, it just has to pay the energy efficiency charge. And then section 285, energy efficiency design. This specifies that early in the design development phase of the data center, the owner or operator shall consult with the efficiency utility, if the efficiency Vermont, to ensure compliance with state energy efficiency requirements and best practices. And then section 286, these are reporting requirements, so the subsection.
Let me go back.
Sure.
Early in the design development phase of the data center. Will consult with the efficiency utility appointed by the PUC. I guess I'm just feeling like early in the design development phase is like, it's a little squishy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
anyway, I'm just, I don't know if there's anything to like pin that to, but
No, it's good.
I'm just, I realize there's no like solution to that right now,
Yeah.
but, I'm just making a note to myself.
Sure, no, good question.
Sorry, thank you.
So, the first reporting requirement applies to the data center, so within 3 months of becoming operational, in a form and manner determined by the PUC. The data center shall begin submitting quarterly reports to the commission and the Department of Public Service, and each report shall include the data center's water and energy usage, including its peak usage per day, and an itemization of the data center's payments toward shared infrastructure constructed to support the data center.
And shared infrastructure constructed. Is that if they build transmission lines or water, piping, something like that? Okay,
It's not necessarily solely used for them, so, yeah.
okay.
So then subsection B is an annual report requirement by the Department of Public Service beginning on report January 15th, 2028. Provided at least one data center has entered into a large load service agreement contract. The commissioner shall include in the department's annual report, annual energy report, findings and recommendations related to the energy, environmental, and economic impacts of data center construction and operation in Vermont, as well as any impactful developments within the region, including any benefits to all ratepayers from electric infrastructure projects undertaken to provide power to one or more data centers. Section 287 is just rulemaking authority, to the extent necessary. Implement the provisions of this subchapter, and section 2 is the application section. Basically, this subchapter applies to any data center that's not operational on the effective date. The effective date of this bill is on passage, as well as to any existing smaller traditional data centers that are operational on the effective date to the extent that they want to increase their capacity such that they might meet thresholds here. So there are, I believe, 5 kind of what are both the traditional data centers in Vermont. Collectively, they use, I think it's about half a megawatt of power combined, just to give you an idea of the size differential.
I'm just flagging. I could picture changing the wording on line 18. Instead of a smaller traditional data centers, like, just to. Data centers that are too small to meet the thresholds.
Right,
current-
really for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, no. So then, I'll get into the land use, requirements, section 3 on page 7. This is basically under Act 250, adding to the definition of development, which would trigger Act 250 review. Is basically adding, the CM line 7, the construction of improvements on a tract or tracts of land or a data center as defined in this bill. So the 20 megawatt definition is the same. So any data center would be subject to Act 250 review. Then section 4, I'm actually not gonna go through this in detail, I'm gonna let Mike go through it. This concerns the cooling system.
So just to note this,
Yes.
we would want to make sure that this is actually true as it relates to Monet's.
Which was
Oh.
actually true.
Monet's, there's no Act 250 review,
Oh,
so we want to make sure.
We could say like notwithstanding
Yeah, no, that's right.
all the tier 1A
Yeah.
stuff.
And I will just put a pin in this, I'm just sitting here thinking, should we actually not allow these in 1As and 1Bs because they're there for condos and houses? So we should
Yeah,
think about that.
yes, so like
And
just,
then that raises the other issue, though, if you do that.
Yeah.
Then they go to places, we also, so anybody.
Also, you're just talking about limiting them to areas that are zoned industrial.
For instance.
oh,
Yeah,
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 well, that's interesting.
yeah.
Okay,
You wanna think of, we should think about that, but
okay,
at least we wanna make sure this adheres, yes.
Which would be a natural place for them to go,
in the
to an
industrial,
industrial using.
yeah, I agree, yes,
Do you have any idea how many of these we're gonna need?
How many days?
How many of the data centers are gonna be?
No idea. No, and I think it just also might depend regionally what's available and.
They're increasing exponentially right now.
and also what does the need mean?
Sure.
I would like to believe we don't need any of it. Sorry, oh.
Okay, now I'm gonna let Mike talk about the water provision. And then I'm just gonna talk about 2 more sections on page 10, section 5. This is just a report requirement for the PUC on or before January 15th, 2027. To prepare a written report on projected regional renewable electric generation market conditions. So specifically examining the cost and availability of new regional renewable electric generation resources during specified period of time, 2027 through 2035.
I'm sorry, I think I missed something. Where did you jump to?
Oh, I'm sorry, page 10.
Okay, I apologize, thank you.
No
Okay.
problem.
Yeah.
So line 9, section 5. So again, just trying to better understand the market for renewable energy. And then B is just requiring the commission to seek input from interested stakeholders, electricity companies, renewable energy developers, regional transmission organizations, senior advocates, other members of the public. Department, other state entity as appropriate, and it's not, this process is not subject to investigation procedures under Administrative Procedures Act, so it's an informal process. Is essentially what that is saying. And then submit the report to various subject matter committees, including this one. And then section 6 is the section we talked about earlier concerning data center decommissioning. So this basically asks Commissioner of Public Service, in consultation with the Secretary of Natural Resources, the Chair of the Land Use Review Board, and any other interested stakeholders deemed appropriate by the Commissioner. That shall recommend a regulatory model for data center decommissioning. Again, defining data center consistently with the first section. And then model shall ensure responsible data center decommissioning in a manner that protects and preserves the environment and public health and welfare. Shall include standards and procedures that address 1, approval of a decommissioning plan by the appropriate regulatory entity. 2, regulatory oversight of the process, including through site visits and inspections. 3, a bond requirement or other financial assurance to ensure the data center is solely responsible for the costs associated with implementation of an improved data commissioning plan. 4, guidelines for data sanitization or physical destruction of highly sensitive storage devices and the documented chain of custody for information technology access. 5, guidelines for environmental compliance, hazardous material handling, environmental remediation, and site restoration. 6, the timeline.
Sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt, I am just wondering if I don't think there was a definition of data sanitization. I mean, I feel like I understand what that is, but I'm wondering if that is a understood, defined term.
I think so, although you certainly could include it, but I know, for example, at the federal level, there are decommissioning requirements that include, and I'm assuming that those provisions will be looked at, because they apply to data centers.
And they take be around much longer, so we might want to.
Have our own.
My point being like that. Yeah,
Okay,
there is a general understanding of what
Yeah, what that
information,
Yeah.
but there's no reason why I can't define it to be perfectly
Okay.
clear.
okay.
So I can see if there are definitions.
Yeah, it would be interesting, because I mean, I imagine that there are degrees of sanitization, actually,
Yeah.
you know, that it could be all the way from like, if we just wiped this clean, there's nothing here now.
Just funnel all the data to Joe, shooting out the data.
That's the sanitization, or is it like we just removed all of the social security numbers that popped up, or we just removed, you know what I mean, like. We removed all the regular, snail mail addresses, you know, that kind of thing. So,
I think it's a good point. The only thing I might say is that you might not want to be too prescriptive.
Yeah.
Because this will come back to you as draft legislation. These are recommendations of the
Yeah.
department. So they might have ideas about. I don't know.
I get that point.
They might, yes.
Want to define what that means. And so you could say. Yeah, if you wanted to set the floor, you'd certainly do that.
sorry, the who?
PUC.
The PUC, okay,
Department of Public Service,
okay,
they're gonna
Right.
lead.
The commission of
That's
public
been
service.
Commissioner of Public Service.
okay.
Oh, commissioner of public service, okay.
I know there's complaints, but Senator Williams and then.
Back to the decommissioning, as far as if somebody, they decide to build one of these and then sell. Is that included in the language as far as who is responsible for?
So if it remains operational, but if there's just a new owner, I think the contract terms would have to be renegotiated, but consistent with new contracts. What's already been.
My question is about in the report for decommissioning, might there be, we're trying to protect ratepayers in the ramp up of these things. There might be impacts on ratepayers on the ramp down too. And it could raise electric rates for people because we built a system to increase the load of electric, and if it goes away suddenly, then it might increase everybody else's rates.
And that's an excellent point, and so there was that provision in the contract that had to do with. The data center has to have collateral. to ensure that if there are stranded costs like that, they walk away from it, and
Yeah.
then there's this. That they'll be able to cover those costs, so
Okay.
5 years on, that's the goal, that's the intent.
Okay.
there, and. As part of the decommissioning plan, you know, that also, those costs are only on the data center, that they can't be. So that's in subdivision 3. So.
Oh, I see, okay.
To ensure data center is solely responsible for the costs of decommissioning.
Yeah, I guess. I'm not sure that would cover the sort of longer term rate impact that it could have on people. I don't know,
From your guys, that's what, just to build up their infrastructure.
yeah, I mean, one of the arguments I've heard in favor of data centers is that it increases the demand, and if the infrastructure can be improved to provide the demand, it could lower everybody's rates, because there's more
But the infrastructure.
right, there's more repairs on it. So if they were to go away after the state or the utility has built the infrastructure, then the ratepayers who are left are there to pick up the slack, and that might raise their rates.
Sure.
And it might be for a while.
Yeah, and it's a good question, and we can kind of revisit those contract terms, so
Okay.
that's where they try to get at that, whether
Okay.
they adequately cover that.
Okay.
To make sure that
Okay,
it does.
okay, thank you.
Senator Hurley, are you, I'm thinking about your question in terms of, debt that is sort of hanging over, anyway, I'm interested in.
Yeah, that's another,
Yeah, like who ends up paying for the thing if this collapses?
yeah,
And just trying to think about how that would play out.
Transmission costs are a huge part of your look,
the cost of the infrastructure.
just the transmission costs.
Yeah.
It's,
I mean, I'm thinking about this, maybe this isn't exactly the right comparison, but you know, a city pays a ton of money to build a new sports facility. And then 10 years later, that team leaves, and the city is left with this empty big facility and maybe bond payments and debt service for it. So
Yeah.
trying to figure out how
Make sure
to
that, yeah.
prevent if the team leaves.
And so we can revisit the collateral language. And also, I think that's why there's the requirement that they pay, that they are signing a contract that they're gonna pay based on their projected usage for the duration of the contract, which is the period of time when we recoup the cost. So
Yeah,
they're still on the hook contractually, even if that's the intent behind those provisions. But if they need to be tightened up, that's possible.
Yes, go ahead.
Should, or could we have in the contract and then in the review, but you see a stopgap decommissioning, some stopgap decommissioning language? Because, right, I mean, it's not gonna happen, but at least theoretically, because we're just getting reported about that, if something came in before that,
Yeah.
and we've done something, we can have no decommissioning plan. So could we figure out a way to do a stopgap requirement?
So I will say this, yes, you definitely could. Who approves or what requirements are? Yeah. In one of the versions of the bill, they had that requirement in the contract that the data center has a decommissioning. I'll just mention that the PUC kind of pushed back and said, don't look at us. We don't do siting, we don't know, what's involved.
So
So I'm just mentioning that,
That's okay.
but so maybe under Act 250 or just not even under Act 250, maybe it's separate from Act 250. I don't know, there are issues.
So an alternative
Yeah,
might be 2 or 3 year moratorium. And what are the issues that, did you discuss that, and the issues come up with trying to impose a moratorium for short period of time? Well,
I don't think it really necessarily came up. I mean, I think the committee was aware that that's a possibility. But they decided to
are there,
pursue this.
are there issues that would arise if we tend to invest?
Moratorium. I think that will depend somewhat on where the administration goes. So as you all know, there's a huge push at the federal level to deploy data centers and invest in energy, the grid to enable the operation of data centers. There's a couple of initiatives going on. One related to AI, not just regulation of AI, but the deployment of data centers. Under the current executive order, there is not a preemption, but there's contemplation that Congress should act maybe in permitting the land use. Right? In terms of land use and siting, it's traditionally, this is gonna be debated, no doubt, because there are new FERC rules too, depending on how a company interconnects with the grid. But in general, the siting location is traditionally reserved to the states, but there are backstops even in federal law, if it's national corridor, that there needs to be transmission. But there's definitely a push at the federal level to preempt states that obstruct the deployment of data centers. So I think it's kind of a wait and see at this point, whether just doing a moratorium. I think that,
I answered before, that's just.
or as a couple of months. Yeah, so that's,
Actually not.
so, right, I think that would be okay.
So.
But I think, yeah, but I think part of it also is because a straight up moratorium would be harder to defend. But a moratorium that says we need this for the purpose of doing the research to ensure, right? So I think it just depends how you're structuring it, what's a reasonable
And the shorter.
period of time, so that we can be prepared, you know, I think. Those are just some of the considerations legally that I think we think, but
Yes,
I may have missed it. I understand these things cause a lot of noise. So, I mean, to your point about being 1A. The reason not to.
so
Was that taken into consideration?
So I am not at 250 as
Okay.
certified, however,
That's good.
there are noise requirements that are considered under Act 250. There was, I'll just mention, earlier iterations of this bill. Didn't do the Act 250, instead they had the PUC doing a siting like they do for new generation facilities under 248, for new telecom facilities under 248A. Had the PUC kind of doing all of it. But then there was just more conversation about PC, maybe not appropriate, this is more land use, this is more appropriate. The land use review board district commission, so they bifurcated the two. But the reason why I'm saying that is because some of the earlier provisions they looked at, that there was some duplication because they hadn't yet moved everything over. Noise was something that came up. It wasn't the original bill that the PC would look at. Land use review board testified and went through each one and said we would cover noise, and I think under air quality, if I'm not mistaken, I thought they said it was an air or maybe community impact, but. Yeah, so they did provide some testimony. Some of this. So just in the decommissioning plan is a timeline for starting and completing the process after the abandonment, closure, destruction, or permanent cessation of operations. And any other matters deemed appropriate, and so you'll get this recommendation in the form of draft legislation this year on December 15th. And it will come through this committee as well as others. So that's all that I have, unless there are questions for me, otherwise.
Well, I do have, I think I have a question that's really like technology oriented around data centers and what happens to the grid when they turn on. If you have something that's 20 megawatts that all of a sudden turns on. The physics of like what happens to the grid at that point, I think is relevant to grid stability. So, and we've just got to find, I mean, don't necessarily, I don't need to ask you this question, but, questions about how to prevent,
Disruption.
disruption, yes.
No, I think it's a great question. I personally can't answer that, but I know like there are large load users in the city. So
Yeah.
there's a, you can look and see how new industrial users transition on the system and how that. And don't know. Could certainly talk to that.
Yeah,
Um,
so curious, we definitely need to have Velco in.
yeah.
And yeah, like the analogy, it would be nice to know what other large loads exist and how do those function, those interact with the, so, okay. Great, any other questions? For Ms. Reynolds? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, and I think we'll do Mr. Grady. You're ready? Yes, welcome.
Good morning, this is Mike Grady, about the Senate Council. I'm gonna start you with section 3. As Representative Cecilia Maria have noted, data centers may use a significant amount of water if they're using water for cooling. And one of the reasons that the permitting of the data centers was moved in that 50 is because there is generally a comprehensive holistic review of the impact of development on water. So that is why it's partly under section 3, but to be specific about the impacts of data centers on water, a new section was added to Act 250, and that's in section 4. It's adding 10 VSA 6086A. Now, the purpose of this section is to address if the data center is using water, surface water or groundwater for cooling, then it has to meet certain requirements. But as
Sorry to interrupt. I want to make sure that I'm thinking about this correctly. This section 4 is embedded into Act 250?
it's embedded in that, it is
Oh.
now a standalone section. Act 250, like the slate quarry section.
Yeah.
If your development and your slate quarry, you have to do this. If your development and your data center, now you have to do this with respect to your water usage.
Okay, thank you. I apologize. Please carry on.
Sure.
Okay.
So, as Senator Beck referenced earlier, some of these systems are closed loop, and this section actually requires the systems to be closed loop if feasible. But closed loop systems have their own issues because what is often used in those systems is a coolant, and that coolant commonly has PFAS in it. PFAS is a chemical, multiple chemicals, and it's very good at heat resistance and that type of use. So you have to balance both using and protecting water if water is going to be used for cooling, but then how to address if you're using closed loop system, if PFAS is in that system. So let's start with the definitions. They use the definition of closed loop system that's used in South Carolina, in the South Carolina bill. There are other definitions out there in legislation, Wisconsin, West Virginia, other states. It's a sealed cooling process in which the same water or coolant circulates continuously within a data center's cooling system without withdrawal from municipal public water supplies, groundwater, or surface water. So it's not coming from the traditional sources. If they're going to use water, they're going to have to bring it from somewhere else, or they're going to have to use a coolant. I'm on page 7. Mine's 12. Okay, I'm looking at right around. And that closed loop cooling system cannot have a discharge of wastewater to a municipal wastewater system, groundwater, surface water, unless authorized as a de minimis discharge by A&R. So not using the traditional water sources, no discharge unless permitted by A&R. The definition of data center is the same as the one that Maria walked you earlier. Then you come to the definition of PFAS, and this is kind of a decision point for you. The definition of PFAS that is used here is the EPA definition of PFAS under 40 CFR 705.3. This limits that universe to those chemicals that meet one of these three chemical structures. According to the National Institute of Environmental Health, there are about 1,452 chemicals that fit under this definition. Now, the other alternative is to use the broader definition of PFAS, which is it's a class of fluorinated organic chemicals containing at least one fluorinated carbon atom. Well, that increases the universe to about 15,000 chemicals that fall underneath that definition. Now, why is it being limited to the EPA definition in the 1,400? It's because later on, there's going to be a monitoring requirement, and monitoring for specific PFAS is hard. You have an EPA methodology that only monitors for 42, or you have an EPA methodology that measures for free organic fluorine in water. But free organic fluorine doesn't mean that that's a PFAS. It could be a pesticide, it could be another chemical. So the committee and the other body decided to use the EPA definition, smaller universe, etc. But there's still an opportunity for a monitoring plan. If they are one of them to do a monitoring for all free organic fluorine, I think they have that opportunity.
So just so I make sure that I am understanding this, if we went with a different definition that basically hinges on the presence of fluorine.
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
Because fluorine is an indicator that PFAS is present, but it is not dispositive
Right.
that fluorine is from PFAS.
So you could, if we go with that definition, then you could end up with, in your monitoring for that, you could end up basically with false positives.
Yes.
That are like, this was not actually PFAS, it was really.
Right, it could be something else. Yes.
Okay. That's tough, okay, all right, thank you.
So moving down from there, you're on page 8, line 10. So when a data center is applying for the permit, they identify to the district commission reviewing their application how the data center will cool the facility. If they are going to use water, the data center shall use a closed loop cooling system to minimize the impacts to the quality and quantity of the surface water and groundwater, unless the district commission determines that the use of a closed loop cooling system is not feasible at the proposed data center. Apparently, there are some of these systems that aren't going to be compatible with the larger uses, or you're going to need multiple uses, and maybe that closed loop system isn't feasible at that data center. The district commission has that ability to make that determination. But then if that data center needs to use water to cool, and it's not a closed loop system, they have to identify where they're going to obtain water to cool the facility and where the cooling water will be discharged. And then if they're going to propose to use groundwater, they will have to obtain a groundwater withdrawal permit. Now, typically, you don't need a groundwater withdrawal permit unless you are withdrawing 57,600 gallons a day of groundwater. It seems like a really strange number, like 40 gallons a minute. Okay, and so that is the threshold that was what was decided upon back in the 2010s when we got that. So they will need to get that groundwater withdrawal permit regardless of whether or not they're hitting the 57 cents. Likely if they're using groundwater cool, they'll probably, as Maria noted, exceed hundreds of thousands. Now, if there's
Sorry, can I, before we go on, thresholds make me nervous. Does this mean that if they would need to get this regardless of it?
Regardless.
Okay, of whether they're hitting
57.
57, okay, notwithstanding, I see, okay, thank you.
Okay.
I'm good.
Now, if they're not using groundwater and they're using surface water, because they can't use a closed loop system with the coolant, they will need to get a surface water withdrawal permit. Unfortunately, that permit is not currently available, will not be available till sometime in 2027. So.
Groundwater withdrawal.
No, the surface water withdrawal permit, you're on page 9, line 7 through 11.
Oh, okay.
So you imposed the surface water withdrawal program, you phase it in first with reporting, and then with the directive to A&R to adopt rules, and then once those rules were adopted, the required permitting. The rules and the permit by statute are supposed to start July of this year. They are not even in the rulemaking process yet. They believe that they will go to rulemaking at the end of this year, which means that the rules and the permit won't be available until next year. So a data center that's gonna come in that interim won't be able to get a surface water withdrawal permit, won't be able to use surface water as a coolant for their facility. In addition to the groundwater and the surface water permit, they will have to get all other applicable water quality and water related permits, and you'll see that page 9, 12 through 16. So that might be stormwater. Somebody referenced the North American Industrial Classification. There is a stormwater permit that requires, if you are classified under SIC or NIC, that you have to get a certain stormwater permit. So maybe they need that permit. If you're going to be building in a wetland, you will need that permit. If you are going to need to alter or move 10 cubic yards or more in a water course in order to put out your discharge or your inflow, you will have to get a stream alteration permit. So any applicable permit. This is largely bootstrapping because if you already trigger that permit, you would have to get that permit, but it's specific because it's being added in Act 250 and for what a district commission will have to review and determine whether or not to issue that 250 permit. Now, the next subdivision is novel. And so this requires a little bit of discussion. So under the Federal Clean Water Act, when a federal permit is needed for an activity that will discharge to a state surface water, the permit applicant to the federal agency has to go to the state water quality agency and get a certification that the proposed federal activity that's going to have a discharge will meet the state's water quality standards. It's called a 401 certification. Yeah. You might have remember this Marshall Water and Lake, the dam, they needed the 401 certification. A&R said, here's your 401 certification, but it has conditions that will be required for you to meet the water quality standards. So typically that's only when you need a federal permit. This subdivision on page 9 says a data center shall obtain from A&R a water quality certificate that meets the same criteria that the agency requires to be met to obtain a federal Clean Water Act Section 401 water quality certification. No other state activity requires this. No other state permit requires this. This would be the first time you would be applying the federal 401 criteria to a state permit. And I raise this because A&R at the end of the discussions in the House raised questions about, or raised concerns about this section. And I think this is where their concern lies. They weren't very specific about what their concern was, but 401 certs can take a year or more. They're highly staff needy. And so by saying every data center that comes in is going to need the equivalent of a 401 cert, you will be putting the timeline, a significant timeline and significant staff resources dedicated to that. And it's the first time it's been done, and I don't know how it would be done because this would be the first time it would be done.
Yes, sir.
Is this 401 certification is any of it duplicative of these other water permits that are required, or is this a totally different test?
There is the duplication, because when you get a 401, you are basically, the state is basically saying to the applicant for the federal permit, you are meeting the state's water quality standards. Well, you can't get a discharge permit in Vermont unless you're meeting the state's water quality standards. You can't get a permit to discharge to a wetland or arguably to construct in a wetland unless you're meeting the water quality standards. Now, the 401 certification is more comprehensive. They do more studies. They look at things like the aquatic biota, aquatic species. They look at flow. They look at things that might not be looked at in some of the individual permits. So it is a more comprehensive, more issues to be reviewed, but there is duplication. Yes, there is duplication.
Okay. Thanks.
On page 10. If the data center is discharging into the surface water of the state, they shall identify the PFAS that may be used in the operation and submit a plan to A&R for a program that monitors the wastewater discharge, including monitoring for the presence of PFAS. That monitoring plan has to be approved by A&R on a determination that it meets the Vermont water quality standards. And then the addition of PFAS to a water discharge from the data center shall be prohibited in Vermont. That means that they would, if they have PFAS in their water, they're gonna have to put in filtration and containment. Because otherwise you can't control PFAS from getting into the water.
I guess I'm curious about the phrasing there, that it shall be prohibited in Vermont somehow makes it seem like in the future it will be, like, or are we?
You
just
could
saying-
use the present tense there. You could say a data center is prohibited from discharging PFAS to surface water. You could change that. Honestly, according to our guiding manual, I should have done that. I shouldn't have used the passive voice.
Okay.
So,
Yes, go ahead.
so does that imply there are other instances outside of data centers where PFAS, waters with PFAS can be returned to the environment?
Yes, and it happens pretty much in every wastewater treatment facility.
Wastewater, okay.
That is PFAS in their bodies, PFAS goes to the wastewater system.
Okay. All right.
And it's like in the water going by the treatment center, or the treatment facilities as well.
Yeah, what about manufacturing processes?
Some manufacturing processes have put in filtration, but not all of them. There is no current water quality standard for PFAS, but you, Senator Becker, probably aware the landfill in the Northeast Kingdom has a prohibition on any discharge of PFAS from the landfill leachate. And so they've had to put in a containment system, and then manage that contained discharge, however they're managing it. That's.
But just to follow up on that question, so with this subsection G here, we are just talking about data centers, this is, this
Yeah, right.
data centers exclusively, so it's not, like, that sentence would not be applied, say, to wastewater treatment plants or.
Back in 2018, you directed A&R to come up with the water quality standard for 4 different PFAS. They're working on it.
Okay.
It's been 2018.
It's a difficult thing.
No, I know.
They're trying to find a regional consistency. They're trying to find filtration and the treatment that will be affordable and implementable. There's a ton of pilot projects going on right now about treatment of PFAS and water. You know, pretty much any major engineering school right now has a pilot project going on. And so it's difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any questions about this section? Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, and with this bill, I just want to check in with Ms. Tchaikovsky, were you on this bill as well?
No, no, really.
Oh, okay, great.
I mean, you talk about Act 250,
So,
but I didn't write it.
fair enough, and it's also very short, at least that's the, adding it to like, it's in the list of things that trigger act, so. Okay. All right, oh, yes, go ahead.
Do need to make sure that it applies to that. Just make sure.
Yes.
Doesn't say it, because one may exempt. And what's it to the
Mhm.
Or to put in and or, I'm not sure, I thought what Senator Beck was suggesting. We think about that too,
Yes,
so
but
we
it
might
can only
wanna
be in-
get more
Yeah.
testimony on.
Mhm.
I'm not suggesting, I'm just trying to learn.
Well, I mean, that you brought up, whatever, yeah, no, fair, ask me questions. But,
I'm sure.
yeah, but there could be other ways of doing it.
True.
Let's jump back to the session.
Right. Okay. Okay, all right, any other thoughts or comments about 727 before we move on? So we're gonna switch gears to a different bill. Super, thank you. How are we doing? Should we take?
Take a break.
Yes, let's take a quick break. What do you think, 10 minutes?
Fine.
We'll
check it out.
Is that, when do you need to be gone? When do you need to go?
Well, if you haven't done time.
11:30, I think.
Okay, I'm not too worried then. Okay, let's take a break.
We're live. Okay, all right.
You have the bill I gave to you yesterday.
Yeah, so this is Senate Natural Resources and Energy coming back from a break. We're looking at page 718 about building energy codes. And we did not get to walk through the bill with our legislative council yesterday. So we are gonna do that now. Welcome.
Ellen Chakowski, Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm here on H 718 as passed by the House. It's an act relating to building energy efficiency. While I'll point this out as I walk through, while this bill did come out of House Energy, it contains things that are not related to energy. Specifically, it really is about building and housing construction in some ways, and so both Damian Leonard and Tim Devlin in my office contributed language to this bill, so if you have in-depth questions, I'll point out what things they wrote, but you may need to hear from someone else about the contractor registry, for example. But section 1 is a finding section. The General Assembly finds that public policy for several years has implemented strategies to stimulate construction to relieve Vermont's housing shortage. These actions are gaining momentum after appropriate construction standards for 1 and 2 unit dwellings. Gaining momentum without appropriate construction standards for 1 and 2 unit dwellings and with uneven application of energy efficiency standards. Recommendations by stakeholders and building efficiency experts in the 2023 Building Energy Code Study Committee and the 2024 and 2025 Building Energy Code Working Group consistently find that Vermont's mandatory energy codes, the RBs and the CBs, are a subset of building construction codes and should eventually be administered by the Division of Fire Safety, which administers all other building codes. Vermont has not adopted a residential building construction code applicable to 1 and 2 unit dwellings, which means that for these buildings, there's no administrative infrastructure or enforcement mechanism. On to page 2, for implementing energy codes consistently and effectively. Lack of a residential building code also means Vermont lacks a standard of care reference for the public, builders, designers, and insurance companies or courts. And such lack may also limit the state's ability to access certain federal funding. Lack of consistent and effective implementation and enforcement of the RBs in particular has resulted in low compliance rates according to studies by the Department of Public Service. Recommendations of the 2024 and 2025 working group include leveraging the Office of Professional Regulations Residential Contractor Registry to provide market incentives to contractors to register and obtain volunteer certifications, including in energy codes. However, the registry is not so far proved effective for the public, contractors, or OPR. OPR does not have adequate resources to make substantial improvements to the registry. The 2025 working group recommended convening a task force and appropriating funding to assist OPR. While the RBs do apply to single-family residences, the Department of Public Service has advised the General Assembly that enabling legislation does not provide clear authority for municipalities to administer and enforce the RBs at the local level. Some municipalities do wish to have an authority. On to page 3. Section 2 is a session law provision on the adoption of a residential building code. On or before January 15th, 2027, the Director of Fire Safety shall complete an assessment on whether and how the state should adopt a residential building code. The director shall submit the report with the recommendation to the House Committees on Energy and Digital Infrastructure, General Housing, and the Senate Committees on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs.
Yes, good question. This is maybe a weird question, but there's this division of fire safety, and it's a division in the Department of Public Safety. But the division does more than fire safety. It always confuses me when we call it the Division of Fire Safety because they seem to have a broader jurisdiction. I mean, if they're supposed to enforce energy building codes.
They don't enforce building energy codes.
What else do they do besides fire safety? It seems like
Life safety.
Okay. Seems like that we should rename them to have a broader title. I know that's
This is not a question, this is just a statement, because it seems to me like that we're.
Fire and life safety?
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe, because we're often talking about them as like, oh, they could do this, but. Then their title is just fire safety, and so it seems like too narrow.
It's confusing. Yeah, like, I'd also like to point out, so the natural resources and energy, not named. In this report.
I didn't think this bill was coming here,
Oh, okay.
but here it is, so.
But here it is, if you'd like to be added to the study, you can. This report.
I think that'd be great. I'm just gonna say that.
So this is a session law provision. This is not a directive for the division to adopt or create a residential building code. It is about an assessment. Looking to do that, a process that had already started. Damian Leonard in my office handles the fire and life safety code. So if you'd like to hear more about the division of fire safety's work, you can hear from him, but this is just a provision for them to report back on if they have a recommendation for adopting a residential building code.
Can I ask, I realize I'm interrupting here, but something that I was somewhat unclear about is that, because I thought that the state did have a residential building energy code, but we do not have a residential building energy code.
The state has a residential building energy code, it's the RVs,
Yes,
and those are the CDs.
yes.
We're talking about a building code,
Oh, just a building code.
yes, a construction code.
Oh, okay.
And that's why I have said, other ledge council have worked on that. I do not handle building codes generally, I only work on energy.
That's probably why we were supposed to.
Right, yeah. That's fair.
Yes,
I
so yes, and that is why the finding it references that no one currently fully administers and enforces the RVs and the CDs. They live under the Department of Public Service, but the Division of Fire Safety handles other codes, the fire and life safety code.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So
That's-
other, okay.
Building codes are,
Yes.
right, yes, okay.
Yes, well, I am not an expert on the enforcement of building codes
I
generally.
think people that build would say yes.
I'm gonna just go over here quickly to Representative Campbell. Do you have a thought, Sharon?
Well, yeah, sure, Representative Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury. We have a commercial building construction code, which is the basis of the Division of Fire Safety's fire and life, what's it called, fire and life safety code. That is enforced in all buildings and under their jurisdiction, which includes public buildings. That is all rentals, that's all commercial buildings. You do not have a residential building construction code, which would apply to one family and two family buildings. And the DFS in effect finesses the application of their fire and life safety code in one and two family buildings that they have jurisdiction over. They probably look for basic things like fire alarms and maybe egress and things like that. I don't think that they do full plan review and inspections of those buildings, but they may just do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Right, yes, go ahead.
Section 3 is a task force. Related to the residential contractor registry. So again, I do not work on contractor registry or OPR. This was drafted by Tim, but this is an advisory committee, so it's not specifically amending any law, so. There is created the residential contractor registry task force. To improve the existing residential contractor registry and expedite the creation of certain voluntary certifications. The task force shall act in an advisory capacity to the Office of Professional Regulation. The task force shall be composed of the following 15 members. One member appointed by the Secretary of State, one member appointed by the Commissioner of Public Safety,
one by the Vermont Builders and Remodelers Association. On page 4, one by the American Institute of Architects Vermont. One member appointed by the Secretary of Education, one member appointed by the Chancellor of the Vermont State College System. One member from the Office of Economic Opportunities Weatherization Assistance Program, one from VLCT, one appointed by Efficiency Vermont, one appointed by the Commissioner of Public Service, one from the Attorney General's Office, one from the Associated Builders and Contractors in New Hampshire and Vermont, one from the Associated General Contractors of Vermont, one residential contractor not affiliated with Associated Builders and Contractors of New Hampshire and Vermont, or Associated General Contractors of Vermont, appointed by the governor, and one member of the public appointed by the governor.
Are those two associations, they're separate?
Yeah.
I didn't know there were two of them. And do they? Seems weird, do they not like each other, or do they have different opinions? I don't understand.
One is focused primarily on commercial, the other primarily on residential.
I see, okay.
Thank you.
Bottom of page 4, powers and duties. The task force shall advise OPR on ways to address shortcomings in the existing residential contractor registry, including, on to page 5, improving public-facing web presence, identifying cost-effective outreach strategies to the public and residential contractors, identifying and creating lists of trade specialties, and clarifying the relationship between business-based registrations and individual-based certifications. They shall advise OPR on how to expedite the creation of voluntary certifications, including identifying, vetting, and recommending credentialing entities with initial certifications in the following or similar subject areas: construction site supervisor, base energy code, both residential and commercial, and high performance building. Assess how to improve the energy education modules required under BSA section 138, and whether they should be administered by the Department of Public Service. Assess whether the type of regulation for residential contractors should be changed from registration to certification or licensure. I'll just pause for a second. We're gonna talk about BSA section 138 on the next page, so we'll come back to that. Assess whether and how the regulating entity for residential building contractors should be transferred from the Office of Professional Regulation to the Division of Fire Safety. And onto page 6. Consider any other strategies to improve and streamline the regulation of the residential construction industry. Assistance. The task force shall have the administrative, technical, and legal assistance of the Office of Professional Regulation. The Division of Fire Safety and the Department of Public Service shall provide informational assistance and technical expertise to the task force regarding issues related to building codes and energy performance. Reports. Beginning in 2026, the task force shall submit annual reports on or before November 1st to the Office of Professional Regulation, the House Committees on Energy and Digital Infrastructure and on General and Housing, and the Senate Committees on Economic Development, and on Natural Resources and Energy, with findings and any recommendations for legislative action. Meetings. The member appointed by the Secretary of State shall call the first meeting of the task force to occur on or before August 1st, 2026. And the task force shall then meet at least monthly through July 2027, and then thereafter, at least every other month. The task force shall select a chair from among its members at the first meeting. On to page 7. A majority of the membership shall constitute a quorum. The task force shall cease to exist on June 30th, 2029. And then compensation and reimbursement. So there's a per diem provision here. Members who are not otherwise compensated by their employer for attendance shall be paid per diem. As in conformance with 32 VSA 1010. Payments to members of the task force authorized under this subsection shall be made from monies appropriated to OPR. And at the end of the bill, the appropriation that was here for this was struck and is now contingent on there being any funding made for it.
The whole thing is contingent on it, or just?
Well, we can get there, it's the duty to implement, the duty to implement the task force is contingent upon appropriation. You also could change that so that it was the duty to pay is contingent on funding and require them to meet without pay. Or you could leave it as it is.
I guess I would also flag, I'm a little concerned about on page 6 where it says line 18 where it says they have to meet at least monthly. That's a lot. And, you know, if they're enthusiastic and wanna meet monthly, I support them, but it could be,
Yeah, usually we say this many meetings is
Yeah,
what you're
yeah.
allowed, then. But this is pretty open-ended, I'm surprised our appropriations committee didn't flag that, and write it in.
So this is not a study committee or a working group, this is an advisory task force that is set to last for 3 years, basically, so it is a long-term body that's on mission.
Isn't, well, I guess you're not, this is more of a question for Tim, but the OPR. Usually when there's a some kind of entity that gets. Maybe not with registries, maybe it's different with registries, but for certification and licensure, there's often an advisory board that sits above it anyway. That has people from the industry and whatever it is, like optometrists, for example.
and that's ongoing, like,
And yeah, those are permanent,
yeah.
yeah, so I don't know when we set this thing up, I guess maybe, just think it's kind of funny that there was a working group that recommended a task force.
Okay, so on page 7, the next set of sections 4 through 9. All largely make the same change and it is about the energy education requirements for certain trades and professions. So first, section 4 is amending previous A 138, which is the education requirements for specified licensees. So at the bottom of page 7, the office, so here that is OPR. OPR shall require each of the licensees described in subsection A to complete an education module regarding the state's energy goals and how each licensee's specific profession can further those goals. On to page 8. The education module. Currently, there's a requirement shall not be more than 2 hours, but that is being struck. The energy module shall be required as a condition of initial licensure and each license renewal. The module shall explain how the work of the profession or trade intersects with the energy code and affects the energy and airflow. Energy, airflow, and moisture management dynamics of the building as an integrated system. And include education on any state or utility incentives relevant to the profession. So it strikes the language that currently exists that says that the energy module shall provide general information on the state's energy goals and then also shall include an update on energy goals and any update regarding energy programs. So my understanding is that currently that requirement is pretty high level and just describes the goals itself, the state energy goals. But this is changing it so that it would be more related to the specifics of how energy, airflow, and moisture management relate to each of the professions under this section. And further down on this page is being added that beginning on January 1, 2020, and every 3 years thereafter, the office shall review these education modules, consider recommendations by relevant stakeholders, and update the modules as necessary. So this education requirement applies to a specific list of trades under the statute. I'm sorry, I was looking for the list of the trades that are covered by this statute. I can get back to you on that. Oh, sorry, here it is. This is for architects, landscape architects, pollution abatement, facility operators. potable water supply and wastewater system designers, professional engineers, property inspectors, real estate appraisers, and real estate brokers. That are licensed by OPR.
I apologize, this is relative to. Do you, I think I missed the connection.
The Office of Professional Regulation has the licensing authority over the list of professions I just read.
Okay,
And there's a requirement for education for those trades. And currently the statute requires that they just be educated on what the energy goals are.
Mhm.
And this is requiring them to be a more specific type of energy education.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
I think there's some professions that are actually regulated by the Division of Fire Safety. I think that's another thing they do.
Yeah, we're going there next.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So on page 9, heating equipment technicians. So these are the education requirements for heating equipment technicians that, yes, are for the commission, that are under the Commissioner of Public Safety.
Okay.
So again, farther down, the education module, this one leaves intact that it shall be no more than 2 hours. And shall be a required condition of initial certification and renewal. The module shall explain how the work of the profession or trade intersects with the energy code and affects the energy, airflow, and moisture management dynamics of building an integrated system. So,
They kept the 2 hours in for this one, but not the other ones. This one seems even more directly related. These are heating conditions.
yeah, also. Well, was there any logic for striking out the not more than 2 hours for the one? But keeping it not more than 2 hours for the other? Yes, go ahead, Representative Campbell.
Originally, we had struck out the not more than 2 hours for all the trades.
Yes,
DFS felt that that would be an issue with their licensing and training programs that they have already in place. It also seemed appropriate that especially design professionals, architects and engineers would not be limited to 2 hours since they really have a much more broader input on designing and constructing the buildings. And there's certainly a rationale that perhaps 2 hours is not enough, but in the course of crafting the bill, we tried to compromise with everybody, and
okay,
so it was compromised with DFS.
okay, yeah, that's fair, and we'll hear from them.
Yeah.
As well, it seems to me that. We could strike it and then they could still, if it's less than 2 hours, that's sort of like. There's nothing to prevent them from keeping it
That's
shorter than 2 hours, even if this is just saying that it can't be a long part, and part of me feels like it's just a matter of flexibility, we're not mandating that it be more than 2 hours if we strike it. It's a good point. Anyway,
just the spirit of compromise.
that's fair, and that when we can have that conversation. So.
They you renamed it.
Yeah.
I would also point out that the previous section relating to OPRs, regulated trades and profession, was referred to back in the section about one of the powers and duties of the task force is to determine whether that design of the energy education module should be under public service rather than under OPR. OPR requested that because they say they don't have expertise in energy educating purpose. So again, another compromise to celebrate the concerns of the stakeholders involved.
Division of Building and Life Safety.
Yeah, and I renamed the Division of Fire and Building Safety.
Yes,
And an alternate bill.
exactly. It seems like we need to broaden that.
Maybe, maybe more than that.
there would be an associated cost
Yes.
renaming it,
Rename.
yes, new business cards and signage and all that stuff,
Yeah.
well, we can phase it in.
Okay,
On page 10, so the language here matches the language largely in the prior section, and so it has the every 3 years they will be updated, the module shall be updated as necessary. On page 10, section 6, this education requirement currently exists for commissioned boiler inspectors. However, this amendment is proposing to strike it because perhaps it is not relevant for boiler inspectors.
Another compromise would be if that's.
okay,
The energy stuff is
Yeah.
not,
No longer a required education module.
because if you boil things, you don't.
Yeah, that's,
Sorry, I'm being punchy here.
yeah, it says the boiler inspectors, only inspect and test, they do not install or adjust boilers, so that was the proposal.
okay.
Page 11, section 7, electricians. And this is for their energy module. And so, yes, this one still says that the education module should be no more than 2 hours. And it is, using the updated language that it shall be on energy, airflow and moisture management, and then updated every 3 years. Page 12, section 8, the education module for plumbers. Again, same, still it kept not more than 2 hours, and then updating it for energy, airflow and moisture management. And then again, updated every 3 years. That brings us to page 14. Section 9, energy professionals regulation report. The Office of Professional Regulation shall conduct a sunrise process to assess whether home energy rating systems, raters, and energy professionals should be regulated professions. On or before November 1st, 2028, the office shall submit a report with its recommendations to the House Committees on Energy and then GovOps and then Senate and Development, Natural Resources and Energy. So again, this is a session law provision asking for a report. I don't generally work on OPR stuff, so I can't really talk about sunrise processes, but this is a type of process they go through apparently for looking at whether something should become a professionally regulated profession.
Have some GovOps veterans.
Oh, that's,
Now,
oh, great, yeah, you
Who
can
are
probably know
familiar.
better than I do.
It's an interesting thought. About HERS ratings and energy professionals. I feel like energy professionals is, that's a big term in my
Yeah.
mind, and I mean, and since we have Representative Campbell here, who are you thinking of specifically for energy professionals, like weatherization workers, or are you thinking of auditors, energy auditors, or?
More like auditors and inspectors, that sort of thing, people who could, inspect a building for, energy code compliance, for example, that sort of thing. Also, I could mention HERS raters are currently regulated under the Department of Public Service. There are, I think there's 4 of them, maybe 7 in the state. The reason they're under DPS or Public Service Department is, originally, when they became a regulated profession, there was only one at Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, which was, which DPS was involved in regulating other ones. So this was just a proposal to see whether they really should be put under OPR or all the other regulated professions are.
Okay, so in a way, this is about the potential shifting of regulation from DPS to OPR.
For HERS raters, and then whether to identify energy professionals as a trade or professional should be.
Mhm,
In other words, should there be some credentials associated with that?
mhm. Yes, go ahead.
Well, not all professions are regulated by OPR,
No, not all.
the electricians, et cetera, are under the Division of Fire Safety,
That's right.
the badly named.
That's correct. Yeah, this and then considered sort of building traits. but-
Yeah, so I'm wondering, I mean, the HERS raters, maybe that's what they. It's the first time I've ever heard of a HERS rater, but I can imagine like a cool logo though.
Why don't you do it?
Yeah, yes. Get more women into. the
Yeah,
profession.
That's how it is.
Okay. Let's keep going.
Alright, page 14, section 10. This starts the sections on building energy code enforcement. Section 10 is amending 30 VSA, section 51, the residential building energy standards, the RDs. It's adding language in subsection J for municipal enforcement. A municipality may enforce the RVs within the municipality in compliance with this section. So, this language is also added in the next section for the CDs. So, your committee specifically hasn't talked a lot about RVs and CDs recently, though perhaps you may want to. The residential building energy standards have existed since 1997, and the commercial building energy standards have came into effect a little bit later than that. The Department of Public Service semi-regularly adopts these building energy codes via rule. They adopt them based on a national code, the IECC, which is updated regularly by a national committee. And then the Department of Public Service goes through a process when a new code is issued to review the code updates, convene an advisory committee, and determine what parts of the new code should be adopted and what sort of Vermont specific things should be in the code, what kind of variances should be specific to Vermont. So it's based on a national code, it's regulated, it's updated approximately every 3 years. Although that the requirement to update it every 3 years is no longer in statute. The Department of Public Service does not specifically enforce the RVs and the CDs. It is they are enforced sort of by implication. So builders are required to
Sorry, do you want to introduce yourself for the record?
Andrew Brewer,
Okay,
Dow Drive.
okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead.
and I don't know what I was saying. The RVs and the CDs get updated. The department does not specifically enforce them, though there is a certification requirement, builders are supposed to certify that they have complied with these codes because they are the law. Additionally, I will point out that Act 250 serves as an enforcement mechanism because it is one of the ways that you meet criteria 9F. But if things are exempt from Act 250, that doesn't happen. And municipalities don't necessarily have full clear authority to enforce them either because it is a state level code. And so this is adding language. However, though there is existing language in both 51 and 53 about if towns have a certificate of occupancy, they can have this as a one of the requirements, yes, one of the requirements to obtain a certificate of occupancy. But otherwise, it is slightly vague about the enforcement mechanism, and so this is adding a clear directive that municipalities have the authority to adopt, to enforce the RVs and the CVs. Further language is added that we'll get to that says they cannot adopt their own, they can just adopt by reference, incorporate by reference the state level ones.
So question about that, in a way the municipal, like adding this language, I think makes sense and in a way feels pretty clean. To me, since there's not great enforcement at the state level for the RVs. I have my questions about the CVs, so the state is already doing enforcement, especially for public buildings. No, okay. They're not doing,
Not for CVs, for commercial construction codes, yes, but not for energy codes.
okay, wow, I'm still sorting through it apparently.
Most of the codes live at Division of Fire Safety, the energy codes do not. So the Division of Fire Safety does not have any authority over them.
But I need to like draw a visual for this, so like. The Venn diagram of like where things live and.
The RVs and CVs are in the Department of Public Service, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But they don't do active enforcement, they only do the updates to them, they just will
Hover there.
Yeah, I think one easy way to sort of denote it is that I handle energy codes and
Yeah.
I don't handle building codes at all.
Okay.
Another attorney in our office handles that
Yes,
because they are housed within an entirely different agency.
okay.
Who's the attorney that does that?
Damien.
Oh, let's get Damien. We can have Tim and Damien and
Yes.
Ellen.
So many lawyers.
Yes.
Fun.
Yes, go ahead.
I think you do get greater compliance with CVs because architects are obligated to follow the law, so. And they're not gonna risk their license following the law, so you do tend to get better compliance with commercial than very little residential.
Okay, so, but in terms of commercial enforcement. The Division of Fire Safety is doing enforcement for commercial building construction, but not for the CVs.
Correct.
Because they're with DPS. And so there's nobody doing CVs enforcement.
Not in the traditional sense, no.
Okay,
Plus the discussion.
okay.
Two, but
And
then one.
The Division of Fire Safety.
Fire and building.
So,
Yeah.
right, and what we're looking at here is potentially municipal enforcement of the CVs, but not the RVs.
No, the RVs, we
RVs.
started with the RVs.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They're both in there.
They're both in there, okay. Whew. Catch up. My apologies. Thank you.
Yeah,
Making sure I'm sorting through it, okay.
so section 10 is amending the RVs, section 11 is putting the language in there for CVs.
Okay,
And then in between,
Okay.
there's this other whole topic. About within amendment of the RVs and the CV.
Safe harbor.
Safe harbor
Safe harbor.
provision, which is in both, which is being added to both, section 51 and 53.
is that where we're going right now?
Yeah, do you wanna
Okay.
pause, should we take a minute?
Yeah, I think I am good. Just needed to breathe for a second and talk through it.
Yeah, so this is an entirely different topic, but still related to the RVs and the CV. So, in September, the governor issued an executive order on housing. In that executive order, he said that it was, that builders were allowed to use the 2020 RVs or the 2024 RVs. And he also said so for the CVs. So either could use the current rules, which are the 2024 rules, or the prior version of the rules of 2020 rules. The governor's authority to issue an executive order and what he can put in an executive order is constrained by the Constitution. And so he cannot change statutory law via executive order. And the statute says that you can only comply with the current existing rule, which is the 2024 rule. This is a problem because both sets of statutes also include a citizen suit provision. So people can sue if their home was not constructed to the requirements of the code. And this creates a potential legal issue for anyone who followed the governor's executive order in good faith. Because the executive order provision is not legally valid. So language is being added in both section 10 and 11, creating a safe harbor provision for builders who follow the governor's executive order. So on page 15, this subsection applies to any residential building for which a certificate of compliance with the RVs was filed pursuant to this section using the 2020 RVs compliance path. During the period beginning on September 17th, 2025, the effective date of executive order number 6/25, 2025. And until such time as amendments to the RV's rules are adopted. So this is kind of a vague end date. You may want to consider a date certain, or if this matches your intent.
You may be aware that currently LCAR is reviewing updates to the RBs and CBs rules. So there potentially will be updated rules that you, to meet this provision. At the moment, though, I don't think you know when specifically those rules will be adopted.
Yes.
Ellen, regarding the issue of whether the governor's executive order is unconstitutional, is that your opinion or have they been litigated to it?
It has not been litigated.
Okay.
The Attorney General's office issued an opinion that they also agree that it would potentially be found unconstitutional. So yes, nothing is unconstitutional until a court says so. But it does seem to be outside of his authority.
And there's potential liability for anybody involved in it.
Yeah, the whole safe harbor things, yeah.
Page 15, line 8.
Actually, before we move on,
Oh.
on that, because Alcar is going through this process now, would we have a sense of what the timeline is on that process? Tomorrow.
We met on it last week. and
Yes.
Finished it.
Okay, so we may have. Well, it's not, will it be over by tomorrow, or do you think after tomorrow,
I
like
don't
what, how is the run out?
Yeah, fun.
Well, so the end of the 45-day review period is Saturday. So some kind of decision needs to be made tomorrow.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's either an extension or a vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll just try to keep up to date. Thankfully, we have some members who can help us with that. So, okay, let's keep moving.
Page 15, line 8, a building described in subdivision 1 shall be deemed to be in compliance with this section. The use of the 2020 RV's compliance path during that period shall not by itself constitute a violation of this section or of any rule adopted under this section. The state shall not bring an enforcement action under this section based solely on the use of the 2020 RV's compliance path for a building described in this subsection, and no damages, penalties, or other relief shall be awarded in an action brought under subsection G based solely on such use.
So even though these are not enforced, there could potentially be an enforcement action.
Yeah, I mean, I think the statute is a little confusing, but the Department of Public Service has. There is a requirement that there be a submission of compliance to the Department of Public Service.
Oh, it's a sort of a self attestation kind of thing.
Yeah, got it.
So it could still be a homeowner saying, I don't think this was built to the 2024 standards. But they were really built to the 2020 standards. And so that, could someone still sue? Could a homeowner still sue based on that?
No, that's what's.
That's it, I was saying. It seemed to me that's what's being prohibited.
Yeah, we're talking about two different things.
Oh.
We're talking about something sort of, there's two
Oh,
different
wow.
potential options, right? So there is a citizen supervision, so a homeowner could sue under the statute as it exists currently. Then there is this sort of vague idea that I always sort of thought that the Department of Public Service had enforcement authority. They do not enforce in the traditional sense, but this is making clear that a state agency could not bring an enforcement agent, an enforcement action if they found they had authority.
Well, there's a requirement that a builder file a compliance certificate,
Yes.
a self-certified.
Okay.
Compliance certificate, and if they use the 2020 compliance certificate, then they could be technically in violation of because 2024 is what's in bloom right now.
Maybe we're getting there, but is there a similar protection against a citizen suit?
I think that's what I
Okay,
just
so-
said.
okay.
That's what I just said.
Okay.
It's against both.
Okay.
So subsection G, which is mentioned on 15, is the citizen supervision.
Okay.
And also it says there can't be state enforcement. So it covers both options.
Okay, thank you.
And this language is also included in the next section for the CDs as well.
And the safe harbor provision was requested by the Department of Public Service. So, and it seems reasonable, and the builder is responsible for this confusion about the 2020 versus 2024. So, I mean, always appropriate, so.
So the next section, is section 12. Which is amending 24 VSA 3101, and this is about, municipal authority. Related to building codes. So language is being added on page 17. That the adopted codes or regulations that a municipality can adopt may incorporate by reference the residential building energy standards and the commercial building energy standards established in 30 VSA chapter 2. So they already have some existing authority in this section. It is not specific to energy codes, so it's added specifically that they can incorporate by reference the RVs and CVs. And further language on this is added at the bottom of page 17, incorporation of the RVs and CVs pursuant to subsection A shall allow the municipality to enforce those standards.
Wait, earlier in the bill, we gave municipalities the ability to enforce the RDs and CVs, and this is building codes specifically, not the energy codes.
No. This is bells and it's
Okay.
the authority for municipalities to specifically enforce the RVs and the CVs is being added to the RVs and CV statutes and the municipal building code statute.
Okay.
That's what this is
Yes.
municipal.
Yeah.
And this was an attempt to clarify what was referred to as a gray area in the statute by the Public Service Department attorney, who felt that there were not clear authority for municipalities to enforce, adopt or enforce energy codes. And yet, in the Title 24, the municipal title, it seems to say, if you look at the existing language at the bottom of page 16, it seems to say that towns do have authority to regulate buildings. And VLCT, I think, would say that they felt that they had authority. So this was an attempt to clarify authority, and also to dovetail with what I mentioned earlier when I was in here, an effort underway using grant funding to help municipalities develop uniform procedures for applying energy codes. So this was an effort to both clarify statute and also go to that effort.
That makes sense.
So the last section is on page 18, section 13. There's a contingency of funding provision. The appropriations committees have been adding this language about whether or not something gets funded. So section 13 is the duty to implement the contractor registry task force, and section 3 is contingent upon an appropriation of funds from the general fund to OPR for that purpose. I would just say, I think that sometimes adding contingency language like this is confusing. So this does currently say that the task force, the duty to do the task force at all is contingent on funding. And so, as I mentioned, you may want to consider if that is your intent, or if you would like them to meet without per diem funding, or if you like something different there.
Yes.
Was there a appropriation beyond just the per diems?
Yes,
There was an appropriation to OPR itself to manage the whole thing?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This question about, how do we get this information? Public hearings, is there any provision for that, and they make the rulemaking?
I don't understand.
Well, contractors that are doing the building probably don't even know that there's a law that says they have to be registered. There's quite a few of them out there, but. So what I'm saying is that, I'm just sitting
Oh,
here,
the contractor registry?
well,
Oh,
this bill will affect contractors. And people that build houses, so we get this information. It becomes law.
So we can take more testimony on that exact question. And the contractor registry,
Yeah, it's sorry, it's not
exists.
changing at all in this bill, it already exists.
People don't know.
This is not my area of law.
I would
Yes, go ahead.
say that the appropriation that was in the original bill that was struck by the House Appropriations included money for an outreach program to contractors and consumers to raise the profile of the residential contractor registry. And also provide funding for them to contract with some entity to build and maintain a website that is much more consumer oriented. But OPR says that that's not really they don't have funding for it, that's not really, it's their job, but it obviously would make a big difference to consumers and contractors, actually, to be able to see who's registered and what they do and be able to sort and filter, do everything that you expect to do on a website now.
Okay, any questions about 718? Okay, we'll hear more about this, and you have to go. Okay, so with that, we're not gonna do 710 today, and so, that is totally fine. I would love to take one more quick break. The only other thing we have on the agenda, on our agenda today is to start the discussion of a budget letter. And I could use a couple minutes ahead of to like just, to organize myself before we jump into that conversation. So let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll
Okay, this is a natural resource, coming back from a break, and I don't have a printed out document to show you, but I can tell you what is on my list. Right now, because in my mind, there's sort of two sections, right? Like one is, money that has to do with the bills that we passed. And then the other are, if there's just separate allocations that would be important to us as a group. That would just normally be in the budget. We're gonna hear from some folks tomorrow who are gonna be asking to be in our budget letter. So just in terms of the bills that had money in them, I just wanted to check my thinking with you all. I have 218 salts. 219 energy navigators. 223, which is the study, and it's a study on lake stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Seth's like thing, and just because there was some. Right, the per diems for that, and then I also have 325, which had more plans and then the outreach and engagement. So I just have those four, but looking at, like, I didn't think there was any money in portable solar. There's no money in the general permit for water stuff. Fees, right, and then there's the 213, the water meter bill, there was no money in that. And there's no money in CPACE.
Yeah, correct.
Okay,
I think you got them.
okay,
And none of them had a lot of them.
yeah,
I mean, 325 had the most, but most of them were just like per diem,
right,
little
100,
money.
200,
yes, yeah, it was
Yeah, I
like
think
that.
325 at 200.
yeah.
Well, and I think the
250.
to the 218 might have had 200 for.
Oh, the salt bill.
The salt bill to stand up, though, to be fair, when we passed it out here, we just said it's contingent on funding, but it didn't actually have, we didn't have them. We had a number last year, we didn't have a number this year.
What was the number last year?
It was in the 200 to 250, yeah,
Okay,
range.
well, I think we should include all of our bills on our list.
Yes.
Like
I think that's
all
the
of our bills.
priority.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. And after that, I did have recorded that we did hear from the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, the NRCS folks. They had asked, there's they're in the governor's recommended budget at 612. Last year was at 612. And their ask is for 948. And the increase was because of healthcare costs and money from the state. Well, anyway, we might want to, we are gonna hear from them again.
But there's some,
Tomorrow
yeah,
anyway.
612 is base, there's some one time in the
Yeah.
budget, I think, house version.
For them specifically. Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll hear from them tomorrow anyway, so we can get the update on that. And then we're also gonna hear from VHCB. They're gonna give us a general update on their work, and then I think they also have
Okay.
just an update on the budgets.
Will you be able to provide us a list with all of the groups and all of their asks? Just
That we have heard,
or
or,
that are just out there?
That's a long list.
Well, I mean, I don't know, yeah,
I mean,
just so
also,
we can stack them up.
yeah, I mean, that's what we usually do in healthcare, but there are a lot more asks in that area.
and does healthcare, do these groups come and present to? the-
Yeah, and health and welfare, what we have done in the past is create a spreadsheet of all the asks.
Yeah.
JFO would help with it, but there is a JFO person who does healthcare
Yeah, right.
specifically, and I don't think there's one in our area.
And then 195 million, that's outside the budget, right?
Yeah,
That's
that's,
rural initiative.
and that's really for specific
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
but.
Are you talking about healthcare?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But But I don't know, I mean, cause they're, in our jurisdiction is a little, because for example, one of the things that I would like to have on our list is the farm security fund.
This on my list.
Okay,
That's things that we could potentially include.
Yeah, having some money put toward that would be helpful.
Yeah.
But. And then, working lands is another one that
Yeah,
is kind of in our jurisdiction, but kind of not.
yeah.
Do you know, does ag intend to include firm security in there?
Probably, I don't know, they've already done their letter, so I don't, maybe you'll get it this afternoon, I haven't seen what's in their letter, but I heard this morning that they've done a letter. But it would, they'll probably have both those things, I would assume, but.
Serve, learn, earn is also something that we have heard from in the past and have been in touch, so.
Yeah,
And then there's folks who want to talk about the Vermont Rural Technical Assistance Program. One of the things I can do is look at the scope of things that I think are going to be applicable in this committee. There is one other bill that I think is going to come to us, which we should hear about. It's about dam safety.
I was gonna ask about dam safety.
Yeah.
This was an issue last year that we talked about, and whether or not they needed more money.
Yeah, well, I think they found some money to shift, which made it into the House version of the budget, but apparently it needs to, they should, the word that I have heard at this point is that they shifted more money than they really had available, and that there was more money under contract that they didn't realize was encumbered. So that may need to shift, anyway, that's kind of the whole thing, so we should just hear about that at some point.
When are the letters sort of,
Well, I asked this last week and Senator Perschlik said sometime in the next 2 weeks. So we don't necessarily have to have it done by Friday, but I'd like to sort of be ahead of it if we can.
Just a reminder that I'm not here on Friday.
Oh, this Friday, that's right,
Yeah.
yes, okay, so that's a good reason to not vote it out Friday anyway.
You guys could do it without me,
No, no,
but
well-
I would like to be here.
Yes, that's fair, and I think there's, I just even talking through it now, it's occurring to me that like, we may not be done by Friday anyway, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Dams, the dam funding, is that for removal or for repair?
Well, it was
A lot of
associated,
entities out there would like to get.
Yeah.
grant money to-
I think this was separate from that, but I think that's a worth. There's a fund specifically for dams, safety and repair, this was, we should hear more about it. My understanding was that it was separate for a different, issue related to, work that VEM was gonna do around, basically planning operations, but we should hear more about that, but yeah, the dam safety fund should, is worth looking at. Anything else so I've got the farm security fund, anything else that is on your radar, things that might be a priority?
well, we'll find grant station loans.
Oh, right, yes. Oh, well, so I think you missed this. We were. We talked through the bills. We said we should probably put our bills at the top in terms of our priority list and that being baked into 325 would be a part of that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Makes sense.
I mean, now that we're talking about this live on YouTube, I bet you're gonna hear some other people.
no doubts.
That's just happening.
That's a good point. Okay,
Did you, when I came in, you were talking about, they did a letter, said sort of about the House Department of Energy and.
no, we were talking about the health and wealth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just how other committees have taken this.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so. Our bills, so far I've got conservation districts, VHCB, Farm Security Fund, Vermont Technical Rural Assistance, Working Lands, Serve, Learn, Earn. Something about dam safety, possibly the dam safety fund, and this is just the scope of the universe, I'm not saying this is what will end up in the letter, but just wanted to make sure that. capturing everything so far, and if anything else comes up, certainly let me know. Okay, and I'll hopefully have something for you to look at either tomorrow or Friday. But we will vote on it. So,
Do what you have to do,
okay. Great, any other thoughts on this before we adjourn for today? Okay, we're gonna continue to hear more bill introductions, just to get issues on the table. So, okay.